solutions for making buildings more energy efficient. The McKinsey study, among others, proved that these are low-hanging fruits. But the tricky question is how to harvest these fruits. And as we speak, buildings are put up all over the world, and it's very important to move fast in terms of doing something with regard to buildings. This also led us to a discussion of the actors on the demand side, that we talk about, again, a myriad of potential investors and investors on the demand side, particularly related to buildings. There are probably billions of investment decisions connected just to buildings over the next decades in the world, and we need to affect those in terms of adopting more efficient technologies. Then finally, we had 2 points that dealt with information access and capacity building. The first, we recognized that developing mechanisms to facilitate access to information and knowledge is very important. This doesn't have to be very complicated. We have IT technologies, databases that could provide this very efficiently. And that it was pointed out that this information is important both on a technology level but also in terms of experience with concrete projects. So it's easy to get access to other people's experiences around the world. The final point is on capacity building, where we focused on the human aspects of this, developing both the technological skills that are needed in order to increase deployment of technologies, but also in terms of the commercial and management skills needed to establish businesses around these technologies. And we talked about exchange programs, for example, that could be important in this regard. So this summarizes some of the most important points that we wanted to bring up from our discussions towards the Copenhagen negotiations. Thank you.
Thank you. And our final chair and speaker is Leif Ervik, who's Director General of the Ministry of Finance in Norway. His principal responsibilities include international negotiations dealing with environment and energy. He has spent many years in diplomatic work as the leader of multinational negotiations of the first East-West Treaty on Energy Investment, Energy Efficiency, Trade and Transit. He was also the Director General of the Norwegian Ministry of Finance, with responsibility in the energy sector, and Deputy Director of the Norwegian Petroleum Directorate. Leif, over to you.
Thank you. That's me, right?
That's you.
Yeah.
You can start now if you like.
I was fortunate to chair a group which has so much insightful persons in it that if we took those persons with us down to Bonn and on to Copenhagen, I'm sure that we would find an agreement. The reason being that that group was able to demystify this idea about transfer of money, creating markets and so forth. He was able to talk about creation and you know, there is a certain technology, a certain vocabulary that is used. And when I talk about what we came up with, it might sound terse to you, a little dry. But basically what we do is covering very contagious issues, very important issues, and clearly at the limiting factors of a success in Copenhagen or later. So we recognize that countries are different, and we therefore have this idea that what we are creating is a sufficient toolbox to be able to do what is necessary in Copenhagen. Now, who is going to be behind this? And the first concept we say is that all industrialized countries has to chip in. Now that is covering up a lot of negotiations. There is at least 30 countries out there which is not a member of Annex 1, which would, in a good moment, consider themselves industrialized countries. We're also talking about how the major economies should chip in. But the main point is that the ones that are behind creating markets start now discussing the collective responsibility and not so much the division between them, because it's the collective sum which has a climate effect. Now, markets require one thing, and that's scarcity. If you do not create scarcity in the system in Copenhagen, well, you'll have markets, but the price will look more like that. So, therefore, when you commit to it, you cannot ask the markets to perform if you haven't created scarcity in the first place. And in this context, scarcity is created by the commitments of the, what I call the industrialized countries. If they give themselves too many allowances, well, there will not be scarcity. And therefore, the subsequent years will have a very low price. And it will also make other financing systems very difficult. So a core of everything I'm saying, a core basis for creating any substantial markets on the international level is that you create scarcity. And then we have observed the very depressing phenomena that the world is full of subsidies. We had a presentation. There is $300 at least billion a year on subsidies, which motivates action the opposite of, in the opposite direction of creating a market. And even though they're painful to phase out, we certainly suggest that being a priority. There are sectors which are not ready for, and countries which are not ready for participating in the market. The main one right now is the forest sector in the international, in the developing world. We have identified, and many proposals are on the table for that, is in order to get the forest sector really going, you need international finance on a substantial level. You need international finance on a substantial level in order to have a regime on the forest sector. It also has been clear that the capacity to implement things in the developing countries in many cases are not there. Now that is a point that everybody has, but the relevant to us is that that requires international support for capacity building. And that has been identified as a prime target for international support. Now, the international transfers are important and very important. But in the scheme of things, one should not forget that it's many things that the national governments can do without the international transfers. And we're talking about how governments can implement markets on their own, independent of the international system, but certainly there is methods to stimulate the development of that. We agreed initially not to spend very much time on adaptation, recognizing that adaptation is one of the core issues to have a solution on in Copenhagen, but we didn't spend time at it in this case, in this